everyone. We are so happy to have you all here. Thank you so much for coming to our town hall. My name is Zahran Kwame Mamdani. It is an honor and a pleasure and a privilege to be your assembly member each and every day, most especially today when I get a chance to actually see you and hear from you. So I'm going to kick us off about our town hall today. So the first thing I would say is that before I get into this, our event, I'm very excited to say, is available in Spanish, Bangla, Greek, and Arabic. And I really want to thank all of our live interpreters for translating. So to listen to this event in one of these languages, you should click the interpretation button below. You don't see it currently, but it will be activated as soon as I finish speaking. And it looks like the one that you can see on the screen. And then you'll be able to select the language, again, from Spanish, Bangla, Greek, and Arabic. And I want to introduce our interpreters. They will go through these instructions in their respective languages. So first, if we can hear from Orlando, then Bedatri, then Krissa, and then Esan.
Hola a todos, buenas noches. Esta es la reunión de presupuesto del señor Sonan Mamdani. Básicamente estamos aquí para demostrarles que en la parte de abajo, donde dice interpretación, usted puede escoger los tres lenguajes que mejor funcionen para usted, sea en inglés, español, griego o bangla. Puede escucharme en este momento por medio de este botón que dice interpretation. Ahí puede hacerlo.
নমস্কার, শুভ সন্ধ্যা। এখানে আসার জন্য সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ। আজকের এই টাউন হল অ্যাসেম্বলিম্যান জোহরান মামদানি অর্গানাইজ করেছেন। আর আপনার যদি আজকের সবকিছু বাংলায় শুনতে হয় তাহলে স্ক্রিনের নিচে ডান দিকে ইন্টারপ্রিটেশন বাটন আছে, সেটাতে আপনি প্রেস করতে পারেন। সেখানে বাংলা ভাষা আপনি চুজ করতে পারেন। সেটা চুজ করলে আপনি এই যে সারা সন্ধ্যের যে কথাবার্তা হবে সেটা বাংলায় শুনতে পারবেন। এই অনুষ্ঠানটি বাংলা, স্প্যানিশ, গ্রিক আর আরবিক ভাষায় শোনা যাবে।
Καλησπέρα σας. Καλώς ήρθατε στην απόψινή μας συνάντηση. Στη διάθεσή σας είναι κάτω δεξιά η μετάφραση. Θα μιλήσει σε διαφορετικές γλώσσες. Έχετε την επιλογή των ελληνικών που θα με ακούτε. Μπορείτε επίσης να γράψετε στο σύνδεσμο, στο chat. Μπορείτε να σηκώσετε το χέρι σας, όπως βλέπετε. Καλώς ορίσατε και είναι χαρά μας που σας έχουμε απόψε εδώ κοντά μας.
مساء الخير جميعا، نرحب بكم في فعالية نائب ولاية نيويورك العضو زهران قائم ممداني الذي سيتحدث معنا عن آخر تطورات حملة التطعيم، ونوجه عنايتكم إلى أنه توجد ترجمة فورية إلى عدة لغات: الإنجليزية، الإسبانية، المنغلية، الإفريقية واللغة العربية، ويمكنكم متابعة الترجمة الفورية باللغة العربية من خلال الضغط على الزرار Interpretation، والتي هي على شكل دائرة الكرة الأرضية، التي ستوجهكم إلى غرفة Arabic أو العربي التي تستطيعون أن تسمعوا هذه الفعالية بالكامل بالترجمة الفورية باللغة العربية. شكرا.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to give everyone a second to switch to their language before I... And so now you can see that option at the bottom right. You'll see Greek and 4 language interpretations available. So welcome everyone again. We are about to begin. So whether this is your first Zoom with us or your 50th, I just want to give you a quick introduction. Ayat, if you wouldn't mind going back one slide, just so I can run over these things. So you can use the chat feature to share any questions, comments. Again, the chat feature is something that we're going to have saved. So if we don't get an answer to your question during the course of our town hall, we will be sure to follow up with you later. And also you can message just the panelists or you can message everyone. Additionally, you can use the raise hand function if you'd like to speak during the community conversation, which is a 25-minute period that we will have at the end. And then the last thing is if you're dialing in, dial *6 to ask to speak. And if sadly you have to leave our meeting, then you can click the leave button, but we hope that won't be the case. So we're going to move on now to the next page. So we are recording this entire town hall, and we'll be recording it in each of the languages that we are providing interpretation in. As I said, there will be 25 minutes at the end where we'll have a community-wide open discussion and use the chat feature to talk. And this is an ongoing conversation, so I do want to remind everyone that while we may not be able to answer every question in this moment, we will be sure to follow up with you, and I will also be sure to share our information with you so that you know how to get in touch with us. Okay, so one way that we'd love to start off this town hall is if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat, telling us your name, where you live, and what brings you here today. And when you are writing that, please make sure that you're sharing it with panelists and attendees, not just panelists, because we would love for everyone to get a chance to know each other, not just those of us who are speaking today. So here is a broad overview as we all start putting in the chat who we are, where we're from. We're going to go through updates. We're going to then go through the budget shareback. So we just passed the New York State budget. So giving a little bit of an analysis as to how that process is, what it is made up of, and some of my reflections on the process as a whole. And then we're going to go through some announcements, and then we're going to have the 25-minute community conversation. So as promised, this is the way that you can get in touch with us. You can call us at 718-545-3889, or you can email us at 8036@newyorkassembly.gov. We are here, 3 of us are in the office right now in our different rooms, at 2408 32nd Street, suite 10028, Astoria, New York, 11102. As of now, the office is sadly not open because of the pandemic, but we are still working for you 5 days a week. Honestly, we're working more than that, but we're in the office for 4 of those. And we can answer your calls, we can answer your emails, and we're working very hard at all of this. So thank you all so much. Now I'm going to pass it over to Ayat to start us off with updates from our office to all of you.
Alrighty, hello everyone. My name is Ayat Husseini. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the community liaison for our office. I am very excited to share this first update to all of the Muslims and also the non-Muslims. Ramadan Kareem. Ramadan is the Muslim holy month of fasting. During this month, we are able to share meals and break meals together. Unfortunately, during this period, it's been very, very difficult to do that, as a lot of mosques have been unable to keep up their operating costs. Because of that, we have had to really step in and try and provide meals for a lot of our Muslim brothers and sisters who otherwise wouldn't have had them. We are very excited to announce that we have raised over $17,000 to have these efforts go up. We are so thankful for so many of you who have helped us raise over 5,000 of those dollars. We're very thankful for State Senator Gianaris, State Senator Ramos, the Indian American Muslim Council, and the Zakat Foundation of America for also helping provide those funds. We've partnered with 8 different sites, 6 of which are local mosques, to have distributed at this point over 1,600 meals, over 400 bags of groceries. I wish it was 4,000. And we still have 700 more meals to distribute in the next 4 days. This calendar is up on our on the Assembly members' Twitter, on the Instagram, all of the social media sites for the next couple of distributions. You can walk by, grab food, no questions asked. It's there for anyone who needs it. The next update that we are also very excited about is that New York State has passed an extension to the eviction moratorium until August 31st. An eviction moratorium really just means that no evictions can happen. This is incredibly important during this time, as so many people have lost their jobs, have had lost income, or have had health crises, of course, due to COVID-19. Unfortunately, there is an additional step for those who would like to gain coverage effectively under the eviction moratorium. They have to sign something called the hardship declaration form. The good news, however, is that it's not very difficult. All you need is a few pieces of information. The form can be filled out online, or you can fill out the form via paper and send it in yourself. We recommend that you do it online because there are a number of nonprofits who developed a system where they send it for you and you don't have to worry about the cost or any of the work involved. So the hardship declaration, or the moratorium will cover you or protect you from eviction in the cases of lack of payment. So you've been unable to pay some or all of your rent, or you're having a holdover lease. So you weren't able to sign a new lease for whatever reason in the past year or so. If you have already completed the hardship declaration, you do not need to complete it again. This is very, very exciting news. The one thing is that the hardship declaration does not cover you if it is a nuisance claim. What that means is if a landlord were to say that someone in their building is very loud or is having any sort of issues, they might still be able to evict them on that basis. This just
Hiya.
walks, yeah.
I think we should just check on the Greek interpreter's mic, since we just had that in the chat. Is there a way for us to make sure that folks listening into Greek are able to be heard?
Yes, thank you for jumping in. Is anyone currently listening to the Greek? Actually, Elle, do you mind trying to listen in?
I just listened in and it's working.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you all for bearing with us. Zoom times are weird and complicated. So hardship declaration, this is just some basic eligibility. If you are unable to pay some or all of your rent and or you're on a holdover lease, if you say yes to this question, then you might be eligible. If you say no to this question, you are not eligible. The next question you need to ask yourself or a neighbor or a friend that you're helping fill this out is, has COVID-19 presented financial hardship for you or someone in your household, and or would moving pose a health risk for you or someone in your household? This is very sort of broad. A lot of people have experienced financial hardship because that can look in the way of increased medical bills. This could look like having to pay extra groceries because children are now in the home and are not actually eating their regular school meals outside. This could be lost wages, losing your job, losing a couple of hours. So there is a lot of different ways that you can fall into this, but if you have any questions about your eligibility, please feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email. We are more than happy to help you figure it out. If you say no to this question, you are unfortunately not eligible. If this is the case, please do feel free to still reach out to us to see if we can help you find other programs that you might be eligible for. And then if you say yes, you are eligible. To actually submit the hardship declaration form, we suggest that people go to bit.ly/declare hardship. Again, I'm going to say it, bit.ly/declare hardship. This is the form that I had mentioned earlier. Anyone can submit regardless of immigration status. And luckily, you only need a few pieces of information. You need your name, your phone number, your home address, your landlord or management company's mailing address or email address. That second piece is sometimes hard for people to get. So again, if you need any help figuring that out, please feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email. Our information is going to be constantly being thrown in the chat. And again, if you have already completed the form, you do not need to complete it again. I am now going to pass it to Karthika to talk about the MRTA.
Hi, my name is Karthika. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the communication coordinator for our office. So I am here to talk to you briefly about MRTA, which is the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. So recently, New York State legalized marijuana under this bill, and this is a huge win for criminal justice and racial justice across our state. And we've been receiving a lot of questions about what this actually means for marijuana users across our state. So I just wanted to spend some time and give a brief overview on what it means. It makes it legal for adults 21 plus in New York to smoke marijuana in public wherever tobacco smoke is allowed. The one exception to that is in a car. It makes it so that the smell of marijuana on a person is no longer an acceptable reason for the police to search a person's body or their person's bags, except in the case that there's a smell of marijuana in a car. That does give police reasonable suspicion to search their car. If you're 21 plus in New York State, you can carry 3 ounces of marijuana or 24 grams of concentrate on your person. And currently there are no licensed vendors for marijuana. There is going to be a licensing process that happens through the Office of Cannabis Management. And the first retail sale is expected to start in April 2022. That's a rough timeline. And then also in October 2023, users over 21 plus will be allowed to legally grow 6 plants in their household. That means 3 mature plants and 3 immature plants, but currently that is not yet legal. So there'll be more information about licensing. There are delivery license, growing licenses, and retail and on site use licenses, and all of that information will be coming through the Office of Cannabis Management. And for anyone who's interested in that, you can connect with our office and we can be communicating that as it comes through. So that is about MRTA, and I have one other update to share with you, which is we have the Clean Futures Act, which is one of a few legislations that we have our prime sponsors in the Assembly, and we're really excited about this one because the Clean Futures Act will ban the development of fossil fuel plants in New York State. And what that means really specifically for our neighborhood and our district is it would stop the Astoria NRG plant. And then across New York State, it would also stop similar plants like the plant in Gowanus, Brooklyn, and the Dan Skimmer plant outside of the city, among other plants. So basically the idea of this legislation is that we don't have time today to continue investing in dirty fossil fuels. We need to start investing in renewable energy. So New York has this landmark climate legislation that puts us on 100% clean energy, zero emission grid by 2040. And in order to meet those goals that we've already set out for ourselves, we need to stop investing in dirty fossil fuels today. So this is also really exciting because Mayor de Blasio recently joined the elected officials and advocates and organizers and our neighbors across our district in opposing the Astoria power plant and the Gowanus plant. And we are really excited to be heralding this legislation along with Senator Ramos, who's leading it in the Senate, and Sierra Club, who has helped us write this legislation and helped us in our advocacy. So we're really excited about this, and we're excited to share it with you. I will now pass it on to the Assembly member to talk about the budget.
Thank you so much, Karthika. And I just want to first address, Lindsay had a comment in the chat, the Greek interpretation was still having some issues. So we've just checked in, and sadly, there are some technical issues on the side of our interpreter with regards to her computer's ability to stay connected. So that's going in and out, and we sadly can't assist her with that, but we're going to have this entire recording translated after the fact and also sent out to anyone who needs it. But thank you so much for letting us know about that. So I'm going to take us into the New York State budget. So if we can go to the next slide, thank you. So what I first want to let everyone know about is the process of this budget, because I'll be very, very frank that, oh, sorry, thank you. I'll be very frank that before I was an elected official, I did not know the intricacies of our budget process. And I would say that the vast majority of our neighbors do not either, because it serves the interests of many of the people who benefit from the way in which this process operates to keep it a closed process. So I want to really make sure that we go through it bit by bit. So we have an annual budget, and the budget is comprised of 10 different bills, each of which are voted on separately. Now, within these bills, there are a lot of appropriations, so fiscal impacts. Then there are also things that relate to policy. Now, within legislative conversation, we will use and hear the term Article 7s to refer to pieces of the budget that have policy implications. In New York State, in our recent history, the governor has a real preference for putting in policies through the budget, because in the budget process, he is disproportionately powerful vis-a-vis where he would be in the legislative process. So oftentimes Governor Cuomo seeks to push through his pet pieces of legislation through the budget as opposed to through standalone bills. So here's the timeline for the budget process. In late January, the governor releases his budget proposal. So this is called the executive budget proposal. And in many ways, the governor sets the framework for what New York State legislature considers to be the ideas and the bounds of imagination of the budget. And so after late January, there are hearings from February to early March on the executive's fiscal priorities. In one of those hearings, we had the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, come up, and I, as a member of the assembly, was given 3 minutes in my requisite hearing to ask him of any questions, because I'm a member of the city's committee. And so I actually asked him two questions. I asked him a question about the taxi medallion crisis that we have across our state and specifically within our city. And I asked him a question about the NRG plant, pushing him to oppose the plant, which is what he eventually came out to do. Now, after these hearings in early March, we have something called the One House resolutions. Now, each legislature, so that would mean the Senate and the Assembly, have conferences, debates, conversations internally, and then come up with our own vision for what the New York State budget should look like. These are very tense discussions. They are very contentious ones. I'll give some reflections on the content of them and the nature in which they developed after we talk about the process. Then after we come to our One House resolutions, which are presented as a single resolution that we all then vote on publicly, the Senate and the Assembly starts to have conversations about the differences between their One House resolutions and the ways in which to bridge those gaps. This year was unique in that it was said that the Senate and the Assembly had 95% of the same things, and there was a very minimal amount of difference. Part of that is because it's only quite recently that we have democratic control over both houses of the legislature. Then what happens from there is the two houses negotiate with the executive. Now, this is known as, it used to be known as the 3 men in a room, but now it is 2 men and 1 woman, and that refers to Governor Cuomo, Speaker Carl Hastie, and leader Andrea Stewart Cousins. And in many ways, those 3 individuals have the entirety of the discussion and debate as to what is acceptable and moving forward. There are other people who are there, typically central staff. What that means is people who are hired and work for either the Assembly or the Senate, and they hash out a lot of the debates. Then typically, we have to have our budget be voted on by April 1st for it to be considered an on-time budget. This year, it was not on time. It was actually quite late. We went more than a week, I think, over when it was due. And we then vote on these bills, these 10 different bills. So that is kind of a quick and dirty presentation as to what the New York State budget process looks like. And so here's an overview of what it was. And then we're going to get into specific highlights that have extreme relevance for our district. And then I'll speak about some reflections. So overall, this was a $212 billion budget. This was a mix of state funding and federal funding. And when we're talking about federal funding, that is extremely dependent on the fact that there's a democratic control over both the Senate and the House, which is why we got so much in terms of relief funds. There was $4.3 billion in annual revenue that was raised. So what that means is there were new taxes that were passed that will raise income taxes on individuals making more than $1 million a year, and couples earning more than $2 million. There was also a tax that was passed slightly raising the corporate tax rate. So that's where a bulk of that revenue comes from. There are other revenue generating proposals. I tend to typically think of them as separate, things like marijuana legalization or mobile sports betting. Those are things that are also are predicted to create revenue. Highlights for this that we are going to go over is about funding for public schools. So one of the major things was that over the next 3 years, the state has fully committed to funding foundation aid. Foundation aid is money that a court determined in the Campaign for Fiscal Equity case that the state owes to schools across New York. And those schools are disproportionately Black and brown, and we have many of them right here in our district. Individual schools in our own district here in Astoria are owed more than $1 million. Childcare funding was also monumental. $2.4 billion in federal funding was secured. And then rental relief, small business relief, and the excluded workers fund are things that are really worth celebrating. Some of the lowlights, if we're going to use the term highlights, are the lack of healthcare for undocumented communities, the lack of full and proper funding for SUNY and CUNY, the lack of full funding for homeless services, and the giveaway of $1.3 billion to Governor Cuomo's Pet project, which is money that would basically giving to the governor's purposes for the redevelopment of much of Midtown. And that's why I voted no on the capital budget bill. But we'll keep going now into kind of specific spotlights of legislation, and I am going to pass it over to members of the team to take over from here.
Okay, so I will start by talking briefly about foundation aid, which the Assembly member just brought up. So in 2007, there was this lawsuit brought forward by the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, and it found that New York State was denying students a right to a sound basic education by leaving schools without the funding necessary for operating costs. And this year's budget has committed $1.4 billion over the next 3 years statewide to fulfill the promise of being able to give schools what they need to, that they are overdue for basic operating aid. This money will help reduce class sizes, hire more counselors, and provide greater academic support to our students across our state. And more specifically, talking about our neighborhood, 41 public schools in Western Queens will receive a collective $33 million in funding. So the schools in our district that will receive some of this funding include Long Island City High School, PS 166 Henry Gradstein, Frank Sinatra School for the Arts, PS 122 Mamie Faye, PS 171 Peter Van Alst, Albert Shankar School, Young Women's Leadership School, and the Academy for New Americans, and more. I'm about to drop a link in the chat where you can see all the schools that will be receiving this foundation aid in Western Queens. And the aid will vary depending on what is owed to the school. And as the Assembly member mentioned, most of this foundation aid is due to schools with 40% or more Black and Latinx students. And it's really just about being able to fully fund what we need for sound and basic education. So that's the first thing that we're really excited about in this budget. Next, I also will be talking briefly about the Excluded Workers Fund. So the Excluded Workers Fund is for essential frontline undocumented workers that have been really on the front lines of this pandemic, but our state, our city, and our nation have not been treating them as such, and they have been left out completely out of federal unemployment assistance and stimulus assistance throughout the pandemic. So the Excluded Workers Fund was fought for by organizers on hunger strike, by our colleagues, and by our office, and we were able to secure $2.1 billion fund that excluded workers can apply to. The fund is not yet open, but our office will be in touch about how to apply and doing outreach. But the basic structure of the fund will be, there'll be 2 tiers of eligibility. The second tier will be $3,200 per person, and the first tier will be $15,600 per person. And there will be different eligibility requirements. Documents will include things like New York State ID cards, New York City ID cards, utility bills, bank statements, NYCHA statements, shelter statements, leases, etc. There will be a lot of bureaucracy that needs to be walked through in order to receive this fund, and that's something that our office is really excited to help with. So we will be in touch with more information, and you can always reach out to us. But those are the first 2 programs, and I will pass it on to Elle to talk about the next 2 that we're excited to share.
Hi, everyone. I am Elle. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Chief of Staff for our office. And as Karthika said, I'm going to talk about 2 other really hard-fought relief programs in the budget. So the first is emergency rent relief due to the pandemic. So our office, many of our colleagues, housing advocates really fought very hard for this program, recognizing just how many people in our district, city, and state have been unable to pay rent for months, and in some cases, a full year. And also the hardship that landlords, particularly small ones, have faced during this pandemic. And also that the eviction moratorium is temporary and that we need to address rental arrears. So someone had asked us in the chat about any back rent. So this program is trying to step up to recognize that hardship. So overall, this is a $2.4 billion statewide rent relief program. It will pay up to 1 year of rent and utility arrears. So if back in March, when the pandemic began, you were not able to pay your rent, that can be cleared. And also up to 3 months of future rent, which is a very exciting aspect of this program because we know that hardship is still continuing immensely. Funds go directly to landlords. So how do you qualify? You qualify if you or someone in your household is on unemployment, if you have experienced a loss of income or financial hardship due to COVID-19, if you or someone in your house is at risk of homelessness or facing housing instability, or if you have a household income at or below 80% of area median income. And that is a calculus used at the city level to determine kind of income thresholds. So for example, if you are in a family of one and you make at or below $66,880, you would qualify. Whereas for a family of four, it would be at or below $95,440. There also in this program are priority levels created, which is really, really important. So people living in mobile homes, if you have a pending eviction case, if you're in an area that the state has said has been disproportionately affected by COVID, if you're in a building of 20 units or fewer, so really targeting small landlords and aid there, you also get a priority. And anyone who's been a victim of domestic violence, survivors of human trafficking, or veterans also get a priority status. If you're eligible, your household will actually be protected against any monetary judgment or eviction. And for landlords who accept this relief money, they can't raise rent or evict a tenant for a year. Also, something that's just kind of sweeping through this week is that there's $100 million additional dollars for landlords across the state, which we are still learning the details about. So as Karthika just mentioned, there is a lot of bureaucracy to wade through, and our office is here as many of these details are not yet finalized by the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, but we are here and we're going to keep you updated. And our goal is really to help as many people who are eligible to actually get this relief funding. So next, we also have a really exciting small business recovery grant program, because many of our small businesses, just here in our district, Astoria especially, are suffering so greatly. We've seen so many shuttered, and this program is really hoping to try and revitalize those businesses. The purpose is to provide assistance to small businesses and also for-profit independent arts and cultural organizations who've experienced economic hardship due to the pandemic. So assistance comes in a few different forms, like grants, technical assistance, and outreach. To be eligible as a small business, you have to be independently owned and operated. You can't be dominant in your field, and you have to have 100 or fewer employees. Likewise, if you're an independent arts and cultural organization and you want to see if you're eligible, you have to be at or below 100 or fewer employees. And to qualify, you have to demonstrate some form of lost revenue or other economic hardship due to the pandemic, which led to your business having certain modifications, such as an interruption or a closure. You also have to be in compliance with federal, state, and local laws, and you can't owe any taxes back from last summer. So again, there's a lot of documentation and process to actually go through, and we really are here. It is our job to ensure that all those who are eligible can, in fact, access the program. So we promise we will be sending many updates and working with all of you as we learn the further details of these programs. Which brings me to also say that that is not the only small business relief. We are still seeing a number of different programs, such as a small business administration program at the city. So there's city, state, and federal aid that's coming. And we really want to emphasize that if this is of interest to you, if your business has been suffering, loved ones, community members who've been suffering, please let them know that we're here to help. If you feel comfortable, please drop your contact information to the panelists in the chat. Otherwise, send us an email at ad36@nyassembly.gov. And again, we are still working really hard to understand all the things that are now coming through this finalized budget and beyond, and we're here to help.
So I am going to now take us back as we've gone through the budget process, the budget timeline, some of the highlights from the budget, and just give you my direct reflections on this budget. This budget process it's a very radicalizing process because it's an extremely undemocratic process. And what I mean by that is that you would think that when you are an elected representative of a district, that you would then each have an individual role to play as part of the collective in the formation of this budget. But oftentimes what happens is that you are simply presented with the parameters of what is acceptable by leadership. And then you get, when we have a conference, we each get 3 minutes. And typically we'll have a conference on each of these 10 budget bills at different points. And so if you can imagine, there was a meeting where we each were given 3 minutes, and we had to, within that 3 minutes, talk about both the Excluded Workers Fund and housing within that 3 minutes, rebut all of the misinformation that was being put forward, and advocate as best we could. So really, this process is one that is very top down. It is one that throughout the entirety of, I and many others were struggling every single day from morning to night to retain an influence within it, because we know that if it is top down, then the top will never actually deliver for those who are at the bottom. And so what I was elected by all of you to do is to ensure that we have more accountability for the working class in our district, and frankly, across the entire state. So different attempts to retain influence look like what you can see pictures of. I organized with Amanda Septimo, who is an assemblywoman from the South Bronx, a sleep out in front of the governor's office. There was a time at which the governor was really waffling in negotiations with the Senate and with the Assembly about whether this housing package, this emergency rent relief, would be one where individuals could self-attest to their eligibility, whether it would be one that would come with eviction protections and rent relief protections. And what we wanted to make sure of is that $2.4 billion is a sizable amount of money. But if there's a bureaucracy that is layered on top of it, then those who need it the most will not be able to access it. So we bought tents, sleeping bags, we slept outside, we spoke to the media, we basically we expanded the time in which people think of is appropriate to debate these issues and made it into one that you could not avoid if you tried to. Other things looked like putting together a letter that we circulated within the Assembly. We got 19 signatories. This was something that I and our office were really the kind of driving force behind, to advocate for the fact that in our one house resolution, which is, as I said earlier, what the Assembly's vision is for the New York State budget, we had passed a vision that had about a little more than $7 billion in annual revenue raised from new taxes. I and many other legislators were part of a coalition for Invest in Our New York, short form is known as IONI, where we were pushing for $50 billion in annual revenue, because we know that the scale of the need in our own districts and across New York State is immense, and we have to meet that need. And so after the one house resolution is passed, typically what then happens is the one house sets $7 billion, the governor didn't want any new taxes, and then they meet in the middle somewhere. And so what we did this time around is to advocate to increase the one house budget with additional revenue streams so that we could make investments into things like a fully parity of Excluded Workers Fund. What I mean by that is full parity for undocumented New Yorkers would be a fund that gave them $3.5 billion as opposed to $2.1 billion. It would also fund things like safe staffing. Right now, across our state in hospitals and nursing homes, we do not have appropriate ratios between nurses and patients, between doctors and patients. And the result of that is quite simply and frankly is death and violence on people's lives. So we advocated for that. And at the time I was mad because that letter was leaked to the New York Post. Now it's okay because everyone can see what we were doing. But the wins that we won were really remarkable. The foundation aid, the fact that we won an Excluded Workers Fund in the first place, housing, the revenue in and of itself is remarkable compared to previous years in Albany to raise 4.3 per year. These are all massive things that should be celebrated. The reason that I really come away from this process with a lot of mixed feelings is because I saw front and center the decisions that were made to limit those wins in their scope. So, the $7 billion that was advocated for in the one house resolution, it was political decisions that took it from 7 billion or so to 4.3. And the issue is that 4.3 is not even a per annual basis. It actually will sunset. The majority of it comes from personal income tax raises and corporate tax raises. And both of those taxes will sunset. And what that term means is expire in 3 to 4 years. And so then we have to fight once again for those tax increases when that time comes around. And I'd say it's pretty accurate to say that in Albany, you get one massive issue that you typically get to advocate for and push through against all odds. And this year we expanded that a bit, but my worry is that in 3 to 4 years, we will spend all of our organizing, all of our capital in just renewing what already exists as opposed to fighting for more that we need. Additionally, with the Excluded Workers Fund, the demand was for $3.5 billion. Then we were presented with 2.1. And then as many moderates and conservatives were outraged at the idea of us taking care of our undocumented neighbors, that fund was chipped away. So initially it was for all those excluded from federal relief. That means both undocumented individuals as well as formerly incarcerated individuals. So after the first push, they dropped for formerly incarcerated individuals. Then a senator brought up the idea that there should be taxes on this, on this actual money that would be given out. So a 5% tax was levied on top of this to every single person who receives this money. Then what they changed was the eligibility for the fund itself. They made it more stringent such that, for many people, it's quite possible that only those who have an ITIN number would qualify for tier 1. And if you remember from Karthika's presentation, the difference between tier 1 and tier 2 is significant. We're talking about somebody who can receive more than $15,000 and somebody who can receive about $3,200. And if the difference between these two is whether or not you have a federal government identification number, then the point of this, which is to serve those left out by the federal government, targeted by the federal government, doesn't quite match. And what I mean by that is we spent 4 years telling undocumented New Yorkers and undocumented Americans that they could not trust the federal government, that they should not engage with the federal government. And now at the end of it, we're saying only those of you who did engage and have an ITIN number can actually receive the highest amount of relief. So that is another major issue that I took with this. And then with housing, the housing program was a major win, but homeless New Yorkers were left out in the cold by this budget. And there was money that was asked for and demanded for programs that already exist, that are proven to reduce homelessness, that are proven to reduce addiction. And our state made the decision to not fund those programs. And so me as your representative, ultimately, I am accountable to you. And I have tried to ensure that I am as transparent as can be. And so from the beginning of this process, when I was really part of the core team pushing this revenue package for $50 billion, one that then voted for a $7 billion resolution, I made it very clear that I would vote for the $7 billion resolution, but could not vote for anything that raised less money, because the needs of people in Astoria are too great to simply accept something that political class says is permissible, as opposed to what the working class says is necessary. And that is what I and a couple other of my colleagues had planned to do. We planned to vote no on the revenue budget. Now, as you know, there are 10 bills. We voted no on some of them, but the most pivotal one, the one that typically comes down to the most contentious debate, is the one about taxation. And so we had planned to vote no. And then 2 of my colleagues, Marcela Matenis, who was on hunger strike for more than a week with excluded workers and said she was going to vote no because the eligibility changes meant that so many of the other people on hunger strike with her would not actually receive the money. Farah Sufrant Forrest, a former union nurse in Brooklyn, I'm proud to call a colleague and a friend. She also said she was going to vote no. And then I had written out my speech to vote no. And I had made it very clear throughout the whole process that I would be voting no on any budget that had less revenue because the needs are so great. And then the 3 of us started to receive calls and pressure from the leader of the assembly, from the advocates who were pushing for this, from colleagues as well. And basically the message that we were told by leadership was that if we did not vote yes on the revenue budget, then that which we thought would be too little, the 2.1 billion, the revenue of 4.3, would be taken away from us, and the budget bill would be sacrificed and be voted down. Because our votes, if we voted no, would result in a cascade of additional no votes that had previously committed to the speaker as being a yes. So with the state of these programs in doubt, we decided to vote yes, because we could not afford to take the chance that leadership was telling the truth. To be frank with you all, I do not know if they were. I suspect that what this really was an exercise in power, an exercise in ensuring that dissent is not permitted. And that's why, at the end of my speech, I said that it might be necessary for us in New York State to change the makeup of our bodies because, and what our bodies, by that I mean the Assembly and I mean the Senate, and that's a cute way of saying primaries for many of my colleagues. And I just bring this up to share this with all of you. And the reason that I believe in that is that I think that we cannot have a budget that holds people hostage. We cannot have a budget where we are wedded to the lowest common denominator, and we cannot have a budget that ignores the many very, very real needs that we have across New York State. So I voted yes eventually because of those reasons. I wanted to vote no because of those reasons. I made that statement about what I think it needs to happen in the future because of those reasons. And I think that there are many, many wins that I'm so proud of, from the massive ones that I've said to the small ones where I advocated for Arabic to be a language in which you could declare your self-attestation and eligibility. And because of my advocacy, it was incorporated into the housing relief package. And I think that that's a monumental win for so many people across our state. But what I'm there to do for all of you is to be clear-eyed and to be uncompromising on what we need. Compromise as is necessary, but when it comes down to the needs of day-to-day life, to be very clear why you sent me there and why I serve as your legislator in Albany. So that's a little bit of a reflection, and I'm more than happy to take any questions about this when we get to the community engagement aspect of this. But yes.
All righty. We've covered quite a bit thus far. If you have any questions about any of the programs that we talked about, of course, please do reach out to us. Our phone number again is 718-545-3889, and our email is ad36@nyassembly.gov. Again, we're located at 24-08 32nd Street here in Astoria, but again, are unable to take visitors just yet. We're hoping that soon we'll be able to open up our office. I also did want to say, I know that Karthika is putting in the chat now a form. If you use that form, you can also ask any questions directly about any particular case that you might have, or if you'd like us to include you on a list to follow up about any of the programs that were mentioned. But again, email, phone number, etc. We're now going to move on to some announcements. The first one is, as always, a call for volunteers. We are very, very excited to have a growing list of volunteers in our office who are making all of this possible. We had a lot of volunteers help out with this current event. A lot of you are here because of flyers that you saw around Astoria. And frankly, I didn't put those up. A lot of our volunteers did. And we have volunteers right now who are recording this to make sure that it goes on YouTube and is accessible in all of the different languages. We are just very, very excited and proud to have so many people in our corner. And so there's a couple of ways that you can get involved. We have a district focus team. They help us with doing research around a lot of different things, specific cases, crisis response, alternatives to policing, and a number of other really, really critical topics in our district. This is also the team that is really helping us uncover more details about these different programs that we're sharing with you, about the Excluded Workers Fund, about the housing, the rental assistance program, et cetera, et cetera. So if you would like to join this team, I've listed the ways to do so below. This team also helps us with outreach. There's also an opportunity to help us inform our neighbors about these programs. And so along with researching the programs, we want to be tabling. We want to be using chalk like we did back in early 2020 for the campaign. We want to be text banking and making sure that everyone in our district knows about these programs, because frankly, the assembly member and all of his colleagues didn't fight so hard in Albany to then not have access to them here. And we really want to make sure that all of the work that was put in over the last few months is actually coming to fruition, and that we're actually able to help you access the things that you are entitled to, that we've worked so hard and you've worked so hard to make sure that you have, and we need help to do this. So if you are interested in joining our any of our volunteer teams, you can submit sort of the general volunteer form that is at bit.ly/AD36 volunteer. That is case sensitive, so I'm going to say it again with the case things, lowercase bit.ly/capital AD36 lowercase volunteers, or you can reach out to me. My email is ayat.zmassembly@gmail.com. I think that Karthika is going to put that in the chat right now. So yes, thank you all very much. I'm now going to pass it to Davina to talk about our very exciting art contest that is happening soon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for coming. My name is Davina. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the administrative assistant and office manager here. And our last announcement for the night is that our office will be hosting an art contest for all students in our assembly district for grades K through 5. We're looking for 1 submission per student interested in participating, and the prompt that we're posting for everyone is using paper and any supplies that you have or would like to use. Draw an image of what community looks like or feels like to you. We'll be selecting 3 winners from each grade, and next week we'll have an announcement for the prizes and how to submit your work. So make sure to look out on our social media accounts for that information. Okay. And finally, we want to open the conversation up to everyone who has attended. If you would like to ask a question or just have a comment for any of us, please raise your hand using the raise hand feature at the bottom of Zoom. And then from there, we'll promote you to a panelist. So you'll be able to speak. And if you would like, you can also turn your video on, but you don't have to if you don't want to. If you would rather not speak, but you do have a question for us, I know a few of you have dropped questions in the chat. You can continue to do that, and we will try to answer. We will try to get at every question in order to the best of our ability. So yeah, please feel free to start raising your hands, and I will start promoting folks to panelists. And please try to keep your questions to 30 seconds if possible, so we can answer as many questions as possible. Okay, so first we have Doreen, who I'll promote to a panelist.
Hello, can you hear me?
Doreen, we can hear you.
Yes. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for hosting this. So to make it quick, I was hearing from Javed Uncle that Bengali people are really struggling to get the vaccine in Astoria because of things like language access and not having computers and stuff. So I wanted to kind of ask what your office is doing in general to help with those type of issues. And I was really excited to see the translations for this town hall. But when people call in or need services ongoing, how are those needs being met?
Thank you so much for that question. So I think that this is a massive issue, frankly, across all of New York State, and specifically in New York City, we see the racialized distribution of vaccines. And one thing that our office has been doing is people have called, people who don't have internet access typically have made calls, typically older Astorians who have needed help in securing vaccine appointments. So we have been doing that, securing appointments for them and walking them through that. And I really want to thank Ayat, Kartika, Davina, and the volunteer team for really spearheading that. With regards to when people call in who can only speak Bangla, or let's say any language that our office isn't currently able to provide because of limited staffing, then what we have is we have a translator who assists us in understanding what that case looks like so that we're all able to work on it. We continually make sure to advertise our events in multiple languages. This is the first time, and I'm really excited about having live translation, but it is absolutely a priority for us. I think the other thing that we're going to look into doing is each assembly office is given the ability to make district-wide phone calls to constituents about different issues. And so we're thinking about how to also leverage that ability with increasing access to information about the vaccine. One thing I can tell you we're doing for sure, I know this is maybe not the best thing to do, but I'm going to move the camera for a moment. I'm in my office and you can see there are big windows here, and we have large windows across our entire office. And in the next few days, we are printing out signs that make it very clear to everyone in different languages as to their vaccine eligibility. So anyone who walks past our office is able to see that.
Okay, that's good to hear. I can ask it later, but I also wanted to ask what the vision or plan for the budget is for next year based on everything that was discussed.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. You know, the vision or plan of next year, I would say one thing that this year has taught me is what tactics work, what tactics don't work. We really employed a whole set of different tactics. Before I was an elected official, I was an organizer, both in electoral work and also, you know, on issue-based things. And so I took those skills and tried to use them in Albany. For example, what that looks like is Elle and I would work together to create spreadsheets that we would think of colleagues, and then analyze the different information that we had been given or had researched ourselves about revenue proposals, and then distributed each of the strongest suit of those points to different colleagues to ensure that when we had a debate internally about what revenue was plausible and what revenue was pie in the sky, we were able to forcefully articulate and advocate for increased taxation on the wealthiest New Yorkers for the benefit of New Yorkers who are being priced out of Astoria and across our state. So I think that for next year, it's taking those tactics that work. Next year is also really interesting because it's an election year, and the political dynamics are such that people are more reticent to pass increased taxes. At the same time, an election year means that there will be primaries from the left for a number of legislators, and so they might be more willing to entertain things that other years they may not have. So all of that is to say that I don't have an answer as yet as to what we need to push with regards to a number for tax increases. But I can tell you that there are still major issues we have yet to resolve this year that I'm really passionate about. Things like the New York Health Act, things like healthcare coverage for all that provides healthcare for undocumented New Yorkers, you know, the ways in which the homeless New Yorkers are left out, and then also thinking about longer term tenant protections like good cause eviction. So those are things, but obviously we make these decisions in concert with many others. So we will be having those discussions in the months to come. But thank you for thinking about the year ahead.
Okay, next we want to make sure we answer questions that came in the chat earlier during this webinar. So first we had a question from Emily Stewart about Assembly Bill A1115. Emily asked, I'm wondering if Assembly Member Mamdani will co-sponsor this bill to assure that badly designed and insecure voting machines will not be used in New York State.
So I want to thank you, Emily, for bringing up this issue and bringing up this bill. I have yet to read this bill myself, but Elle, who introduced herself as my chief of staff, because of the funding issues of the Assembly, Elle also doubles as the legislative director of this office, and really my partner in, I would say in crime, but it's more in justice, in figuring out the path forward legislatively. And so we will absolutely look through this bill. Just on the basic description of it, it sounds like something that I'm supportive of, but we always want to make sure that we believe in every single line of the legislation, because so often there are carve-outs within bills that we want to ensure we're not signing on to.
Okay, great. The next question we had in the chat from earlier was from Miss Manhart. In terms of schools, do you support delinking Regents exams from graduation requirements in high schools, or creating more consortium schools in the city?
I want to ensure that I give an informed answer, and this is something that I definitely have to look into more to get back to you, because it's not something that I have an answer on at this moment, because I need to do more research on it. But I really do appreciate you asking, and if there are any specific materials that you think would be helpful in developing an answer for us as an office, then I would really love if you could share them with us at our email, which is 8036@newyorkassembly.gov. And just broadly to speak about, I can just speak about my vision for testing in general, because there is this question about the Regents. With regards to testing, I am a firm believer in decreasing the importance of standardized testing and allowing students to have an educational experience that isn't determined by the scores that they get solely on those exams. I'm somebody who went through many a test. I went to a specialized high school, and I found through that experience that the tests that we wed ourselves to, that we tell ourselves are the instruments of meritocracy, are oftentimes the arms of exclusion that create segregated schools and leave us with a state that has the most segregated schools in the entire country. So that's just a broad overview of that.
Okay. And next question is from Thomas Daniels. Is there any path for pressuring the governor to allow New York to follow the federal and other states' government's leads and waiving the taxes due on the first 10,000 or so of unemployment dispensed in 2020?
Thomas, I haven't heard of this as yet in terms of a movement within the assembly. I think that, I'm not sure if it's too far late for this, but I would say that, at this point, there's 17 days left of legislative session. And so there is this mad dash till the end. And obviously this could be advocated for outside of legislation, but I think that probably the next 2.5 weeks is kind of the business end time of this, of the window of possibility. So I'll look into this and we'll follow up with you about this. But as of now, I sadly haven't heard anything.
Our next question. We have 2 questions from one of the attendees. The first, will rent relief be available if one was unemployed but continued to pay rent throughout the pandemic? For those who had to blow through their savings but are still unemployed and now without savings to contribute towards rent. Let me know if you need me to repeat that question. So,
I've just pulled it up, so I'm actually reading through it myself. I'm not sure, to Dee's question, I'm not sure if you continued to pay rent, I do not think that you would be eligible, sadly, for rent relief to clear the back rent. But I do think that you may be eligible for the look forward that Elle mentioned about the 3 months in the future. So that is a possible avenue for relief funds. And that is something that I would encourage you to look into. Obviously, the application is still not been put up, but it's something that our office can definitely help you with when OTADA, which is the abbreviation for the that government agency, puts up the application and spells out the eligibility for the program.
okay. Next question from Anthony. Will you advocate for accountability over the judiciary branch of the government? The George Floyd death highlighted the need for police accountability, but judges have absolute immunity and accountability is needed.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for that question. And thank you so much for your advocacy. There are a number of bills that deal with issues like grand jury secrecy that I am proud to be a co-sponsor of. And I'm absolutely in support of accountability of the police at all levels, both municipal levels and state levels. And there is still so much left to do. Just for everyone at home who is thinking about the ways in which responsibility filters down, what is a state responsibility, what is a city responsibility? Most of us engage with police at the city level because the NYPD is a city agency, and funding for the NYPD is determined by the city budget, not the state budget. So when you've heard about things like the NYPD has a $6, $7, $8, $9 billion budget, that's all determined by the city, which is voted on by city councilors. At this time in our neighborhood, we do not have a city council representative. We previously had Costa Constantinidis. He left his term early, and now the seat is vacant. Constituent services are still provided, but by the city council, but things like votes, those kinds of aspects of having representation are not provided. We do have elections this June 22nd. Ranked choice voting is going to be in action for the first time in Astoria. We have a number of candidates who are running, and whoever wins the Democratic primary will likely win the general election, then will represent us come January, and they would be the best person to advocate for police accountability at the city level because they will have a vote. But you can rest assured that I've lent my voice to this fight many a time and I'm in full support of it. Davina, I also want to speak to Dee's second question, which is with private equity having I'll just read it out. With private equity having a stranglehold on commercial property mortgages, preventing landlords from lowering rents when properties are vacant. Chains and franchises are beginning to crowd out other local commerce with greater density in a lot of areas, especially in the aftermath of the pandemic. Is there anything on your legislative agenda for next year to highlight this as an issue? So Dee, I really want to thank you for this question. The stranglehold of private equity is just immense in our district and across New York State. And one thing, there is, I was talking about the city and the state, there is a piece of legislation that has been languishing in the city council. I think it's called the Small Business, is it the Small Business Survival Act? There's something along those lines, which would basically create, would disincentivize large scale chains and franchises and disincentivize landlords from holding vacant properties and really incentivize and support small businesses. So that is a piece of legislation that is happening at the city level that I don't think has passed as yet. One thing that I'm really very passionate about, it doesn't apply to commercial property mortgages, but it does apply to private equity, is good cause eviction. This is a piece of legislation that's been proposed for a couple of years now in the state level. And what it would do is create limitations for landlords as to how much rent they could raise from market rate apartments. Now, it has an exemption for landlords who live in their properties and have 1 to 4 units. So it would not impact small landlords, of which we know and are acquainted with across our district. This is more about larger scale housing for tenants who don't receive any protections. The reason that this is connected to private equity is because a lot of private equity is also buying up housing within our district, and they buy it up with predatory equity deals from banks. And what that means is they enter into agreements that are premised on the fact that they will displace their existing tenants and get new tenants so that they can pay off the very high interest loans that they have signed off on. So that's a piece of legislation that would reduce the scale of influence that private equity has in our neighborhood. Because last year, I think it was 1 out of 4 properties being bought in Astoria, or sold rather, were being sold to unnamed investors. And that's just not a recipe for the neighborhood that we love and hold dear.
Okay, the next question that we have is, could you speak to your decision to use unpaid labor for your office interns and fellows? And if you think there's any tension with only providing class credit with your advocacy for the working class?
Absolutely. So I really want to thank you, Sean, for asking this question. It's something that we have been discussing and debating about over the past few weeks. As of now, what we have done, not as of now, but what our plan is for the future is we have paused this fellowship. We were trying to fill a need because we, as all government offices, are systematically understaffed and underfunded for the services we're meant to provide. What I mean by that in concrete specifics is that we receive $185,000 for staff payroll, but in order to pay our staff a living wage, I've had to commit to raising $20,000 to ensure that we're not underpaying our amazing staff members. As you can see, they're all here and doing great work for the community. And we received a lot of emails asking from college students saying that we can receive course credit for internships. We'd love to work for the office. Yet after thinking about it, and especially after the feedback from those who we hold so dear, specifically our constituents, we recognize that course credit is insufficient and that there really isn't a justification for having any work that is uncompensated. And so we are pausing the fellowship in its entirety until we're able to gain funds for such a fellowship. We're exploring other options to provide financially compensated opportunities for youth in our neighborhood to gain exposure, gain experience in government, but it will not be ones that the sole compensation is provided from course credit. So thank you for the question. Thank you for pointing out the tension. It is a tension, and it is something that we are really happy about the decision that we've made. And it's a decision that we've made in concert with the voices, including those of your own. So thank you so much.
Okay, the next question that we just got. What about funding for nonprofit organizations like food pantries and women's shelters?
Thank you so much, Atif, for this question. So this is another aspect of the budget that I should have gone over, but I did not actually, which is that there's a period of time where assembly members and senators are able to write requests to leadership and to the finance department of the assembly and of the Senate, asking for specific line item funding for organizations. So we put out a call to organizations in our district, and we heard back from many who are looking for funding for specific things. Sometimes this is from schools looking for infrastructure improvements. Sometimes it's for nonprofits. And we put these letters together and we advocated for these groups. I'm so proud of the fact that we were able to secure $10,000 for the Arab American Family Support Center, which does such critical work in our district and beyond. And this is something that next year, if there are any different kinds of groups or organizations that then you can rest assured that we will be advocating for them if they fill out our form next year. And at this time, we have 17 days left of the legislative session, but we're still using it to advocate more for different organizations that we already know of. Thank you so much for that question. And the other thing is, Atif, as has happened many a time in our district, there are so many needs that the government has left so many of us behind. And what we have had to do is raise that money ourselves. So whether we're talking about Alfredo Cabrera Licona, delivery man who was killed on Crescent Street in Astoria Boulevard 6 months ago, I set up a GoFundMe and we raised $12,000 for his family. We're talking about Xing Long Lin, who was killed just this past week, a delivery man who was killed on 35th Street coming up onto Ditmars, who worked for Watawa. We set up a GoFundMe and raised $100,000 for his family. If we're talking about Ramadan meals, we raised over $17,000 for meals, and we're able to give those funds to procure meals from small businesses in our neighborhood, businesses like Mahmoud's Corner, Terry and Yaki, supporting small food pantries like the Astoria Food Pantry, like the Astoria Welfare Society. So sadly, we've had to take things into our own hands to make sure that we're actually meeting them in the appropriate way. And I just want to take a quick question. I see that Dorina had a question in the chat. Who is the intern on this call? So that is Joe, an intern who is financially compensated to be on our team. He is part of the internship program that the Assembly runs, where each Assembly office gets one intern that works for 30 hours a week and is compensated for their time through pay. And so we're really happy to have Joe, but sadly, we will not have Joe for beyond the legislative session. And we desperately need more help, and we'll figure out creative solutions that necessitate that come with compensation for all of that help.
So as of right now, we're all caught up on questions, but we still have about 10 minutes if anyone else would like to raise their hands or put something in the chat.
I can just also add something, Davina, which
Sure.
is a correction to what I said earlier. I had said earlier that the next city council person will take the seat in January. I'd like to thank Evie Hanzopoulos, who is herself a candidate for the city council seat, for correcting in the chat that actually the next city council member will take the seat in November. And so that's really exciting. And Atif, I will be following up with you on about the 10th of May. Thank you so much for reminding me. I will answer Ashley's question, which is the favorite restaurant in Astoria for iftar. It's very hard. There are many lovely restaurants, and yes, thank you, Bid3, for also specifying that interpreters are being compensated as well. I would say one of my favorites is Sammy's Kebab House, which is in Astoria, sadly out of our district. It's on Crescent Street between 35th and 36th Avenue. It's an Afghan restaurant. It's a great place to go to break fast. I also love to go to Himo's. It is a smoothie store, I don't know what smoothie place on Steinway, which has great mint smoothies. The Gully is a lot of fun as well. There are a lot of different beautiful places. And obviously, being in Astoria, I've also broken fast many a time at Greek restaurants. A very good friend who runs Elia's Corner, and also really love Bahari on Broadway.
It looks like we have one additional question from Doreen. So I'm going to promote Doreen one more time.
Hello again. I also wanted to ask, I know there was legislation introduced at the assembly level. I don't really remember the name or the number, but like to help with kind of regulation dealing with the bike lane accidents that have been occurring, particularly the Queensboro Bridge. I know there were concerns that it gives Como too much power, and like I wanted to hear what the updates were. Like I've been hearing things from the community board, and I know things are up in the air, but you know, it seems like to be a very serious issue where we need something to be done. So I wanted to ask about that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question, Doreen. So if I'm understanding this correctly, this is a reference to a piece of legislation introduced by my good friend Jessica Gonzalez Rojas, which would create an MTA task force that is tasked with the really the bringing together and the implementation of bike access vis-a-vis different MTA projects, something I care very much about. The reason I haven't signed on to co-sponsor that bill as yet is specifically because of what you said, which is that the task force as it is right now gives the vast majority of appointments to the governor. The governor is someone I have very little faith in general, but specifically with regards to transit issues, he's someone that has systematically undermined transit initiatives across the state time and again. And sometimes he has undermined it through his appointments to these kinds of task forces and initiatives and agencies. And so I have been working with Jessica and speaking also to her lovely chief of staff, Brian, about the ability to augment and amend the legislation rather, to reduce the amount of power that Como has for that specific task force. I think that sadly, what that legislation, while it needs to be passed, that would not have an impact in terms of the violence that we're seeing in our own neighborhood on bike lanes. And that's, so with that, again, this is one of the places where the city really takes the forefront. I've been in many conversations with the Department of Transportation. I've written many a letter, I've done many an event, and I'm planning on doing much more because, you know, we've lost two members of our community in the last 6 months. We've lost many more when we think about the years prior. And it's all on the same bike lane that I bike from my apartment on 35th and Broadway. I bike over to our office. I take the 35th Street bike lane. We had Zelia was killed here, I think just 2 to 3 years ago on 35th Street. We had Shing Now who's been killed on 35th Street in Ditmars. What this comes back to really is implementation, which is that the Department of Transportation needs to implement protections on bike lanes that are not simply paint, because paint does not actually save people's lives, only proper protection does. So that's something that I've been advocating for and will continue to advocate for, to have truly protected bike lanes, because that in itself will be better for everyone, whether it's whether you're a cyclist, whether you're a pedestrian, whether you're a driver. You don't need to have to worry about whether you're veering into this lane or not, because they're going to be separate entirely. And that's what I really think needs to happen. And that's a question of, does the mayor want this to happen? Does the agency that he controls want this to happen? And that's their decision. And we're going to pressure them as much as we can to make that decision.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. That looks like the last question that we had. If anyone has anything else, we have 5 more minutes. Otherwise, that looks like the end of the Q&A for us.
I would just like to say, we have these last few minutes, that it is such a pleasure for me to be a part of the team that I am so proud to call my colleagues. And El, Ayat, Karthika, Davina, and Joe, these are people who really do the day-to-day work of keeping our office running and responding to your concerns. And I'm so proud to be a part of a team with them. And they are the people who will really be the points of contact for you, and really the implementation of what our vision is for what this neighborhood could be and should be and will be. And I want to thank them and acknowledge them and also advise you, if you have any issues, that these are the people to reach out to through the numbers that we provided. And obviously, I am always here for all of you as well. I want to just give an update as to my time. So right now, I spend about 4 days a week in Albany. I leave here Sunday nights. I come back on Thursday nights. And I go up. Right now, you can do this virtually, but it's my job to be the most effective representative for all of you. And so I go up to Albany to build relationships with legislators, to meet with staff members who run committees, to try and pressure leadership in different ways, to push the bills that will change your lives as far as I can. And then I come back to Astoria, and I'm really only here for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then we go back again. That rhythm and that calendar, it ends on June 10th, which is the end of the legislative session. Then after June 10th until December 31st, there is no legislative session in New York State. And so then the focus becomes the district. As the district is always a focus, but it becomes the exclusive focus in that there is no time being spent on session or legislative. It is all about how do we implement, how do we advocate, how do we organize in Astoria in our own homes. And I'm very, very, very excited to remain in Astoria every single day of the week. So I'm also, you'll likely see a lot more of me in person because I will be here for more time. So I'm really, really excited for that. I think that I saw one hand just get raised. We can maybe do one last question. It was J.A. Davina, do you see that? Well, I'm also 30 minutes away from breaking my fast, so I may be hallucinating. So we'll just leave it at that. But thank you all so much for coming to this town hall. We will have many more of them. We are committed to being transparent, being accountable, and being in conversation. And know that if we did not answer your question sufficiently, or we didn't answer it at all, we will be going through the chat. These are the ways to get in touch with us. And this is how you can stay in contact with us. And we really look forward to continuing to serve you and work for you and with you in the weeks, the months, and hopefully the years to come. So thank you all very, very much.